Hello everyone, this is Sujivan again from Ubrick. So this is our last of the three-part limited series that we've been doing around these challenging times. And just to bring to your attention, if you have missed out on the first two episodes, I'd suggest you strongly go and check them out. And also to quickly summarize what it's about, the first episode was a general POV about Ubrick as a business and as individuals, what we think about the ongoing situation. Then episode 2 was more tailored towards the higher education community and also the overall ecosystem, right? As a business, how we will, face this situation, especially times of battle. And then this is the last episode. And for this, we have a special guest, none other than the CEO at Ubrick, Monash Unni. So hi Monash, how are you doing?
Hey Sujivan, great. And thanks for having me in this episode. Sujivan, in terms of higher education, I'm quite glad that we can talk about it because we have seen this landscape changing multiple times. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Back from 2008, the financial crisis, then the COVID, we have seen the education industry change. Yeah, and what we have got an opportunity as Ubrick is working with the universities as a front row participants of how these changes happened and how we could help them and work closely with them during these times.
Absolutely. And I think the most curious thing about this episode is our audiences are waiting to hear from us what this episode is going to be about. So if you can give them a glimpse of what we are going to talk about today, that'll be great.
Perfectly. So yeah, we want to see how the next 6 to 12 months is going to pan out for universities, especially in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to put some predictions of we're seeing some kind of a temporary slowdown of how things are happening. But what we want to actually say, or we want to emphasize that this is a time where there's a shift in how parents and students are making decisions.
Absolutely.
They're valuing other things than what you're apparently seeing for the decision making. And we want to put these predictions together so that you can plan yourself better. So
Amazing.
Jeevan, I would like to put this across to you because you work very closely with them. Yeah. And what are some of these predictions that you are seeing and in the trends that will follow in the next couple of months?
Thank you for putting me on the spot, Monash. I think, Shaf also did the same thing. When I asked him a question, he put it back to me. So anyways, let me get started with this. So, I'd like to give a shout out to Ashwin for definitely brainstorming a lot of these discussions internally and kind of helping us, come up with some great pointers here for the discussion today. So number one, definitely you will have to expect competition from non-traditional players. So let me give you some examples of non-traditional players. I'm talking about the Emeritus of the world. I'm talking about Next MBA, for example, who have been in the market for all these years, but they have actually coexisted and had a smaller share of what you do as a business in the market. But this is the time they would try to lead the situation, obviously, because students and parents, as you said, their behaviors have changed, and definitely the change in behavior also goes into understanding what's more flexible, what's better in terms of a cost angle, what is going to give me greater speed to outcome. So definitely the standard universities will face this competition. So don't overlook this. This is one of the strongest predictions that we have. And then number 2 is, we have also spoken about this in the previous episode, parent influence is going to become stronger.
Definitely.
Because we have always told universities, and we have seen situations where universities are mainly focusing on students when it comes to their communication. So the parent generally is missed out. But some universities are doing a great job at this. But this is the time where the entire equation is going to shift.
And I think especially when it comes to international admissions,
100%.
definitely parents, I think this particular time will have a lot more influence.
Exactly. International, because obviously it's, relocation, it's, flights are involved. So there is a lot of concern, definitely. But even domestic. This is the time where we feel parents are going to move from being an influencer to somebody who's going to become a risk evaluator. Because even if the student has the willingness to join your institution, the parents will have concerns that will hold them back. Because at the end of the day, the parent becomes the person who's going to sign off the check. So obviously, the parent is going to become more powerful. So what can you do about this? Obviously, you will have to understand the parents' concerns at this moment, have the respective FAQs on your website, do a lot of content which addresses the concerns of the parents, and also do things like, obviously, showcasing your support, answering their questions, not only in your own channels and assets, but also elsewhere, wherever they're asking for concerns, questions. Maybe it can be Reddit, it can be Quora, whatever it is. Yeah. So this is the next prediction. And of course, domestic markets will become more competitive. Obviously, with this shift, travel becoming restricted, there is, volatility from time to time. So definitely every university is going to focus on the domestic market more. Yeah. And this means that, you will have to take a stronger approach in terms of your domestic market. If not, because, other people might take your market share away. And also, when I say, focus more on your domestic market, what I mean is that you will need to segment your audiences domestically, which means, there is a clear difference between how an Emirati household will take a decision with regards to a university, and, which is why, it varies a lot to an Indian household or a Pakistani household. So you need to identify these behaviors very correctly and then segment your audiences properly.
So when it comes to even domestic market, you need to understand how different nuances and how different communities make decisions.
Exactly.
And you need to put that extra focus in the domestic market.
Yeah. So understanding these nuances becomes the key to winning the domestic market, I'd say. And also understanding what would be those feeder markets that are close by, which can still feed into your university's enrollments. Now, for example, definitely it might be a challenge for you to bring students from India in the short term, but maybe Muscat is a better market because obviously there is access by road. Yeah. And Muscat has a better understanding about the regional conflict. So, obviously you can focus on these feeder markets, which also becomes important. Yeah. And another major shift that we foresee is basically how students actually make decisions. So for universities, the unpredictable or the unavoidable thing is that you will not be able to sustain on, okay, we ran an ad, now we collected the leads and we pray that they'll enroll. That model is going to go out of the window right now. So which means obviously the decision making cycle is going to become longer and longer. Yeah. Obviously, once they land on an ad, they will definitely go to a FAQ page. The parent might want to get into a webinar where all their questions are answered. Then they might request for additional one-to-one counseling. So definitely there is going to be multiple layers. It's not going to be linear. Obviously, it wasn't linear, but it's going to get more complex than what it used to be. So this is going to be a significant change in the behaviors in terms of the predictions that we can make. So Monash, I think this is my POV of what we are going to see, and definitely I'm interested to understand, what you are kind of predicting will be some of the key shifts in student and parent behaviors.
I think Sujeevan, you've covered a lot of ground, and let me just probably add to a couple of them. Yeah. So in terms of communication, universities have been always focusing on lead generation and not focusing too much on the brand trust. Because when decision making is going to happen, it's going to be very different moving forward. Because your parents and students would love to see brands that are very active, where their leadership is active. They're putting content out there about the situation. They're showing existing students how are they being supported by the university. What are a couple of these measures that are happening? What kind of flexibility is offered? All of the stuff has to come from the brand. Yeah, which means that focusing on brand content, promoting brand content, talking about that becomes very relevant.
Amazing. And one more question here, Monash. So definitely we've always been talking as an agency on balancing brand between performance marketing. So how do you think this mix is going to change at the moment?
So this does not mean that performance campaigns will have to stop, or it has to have that perfect mix where you rely a little more on the brand, because if you don't do that, without trust, this thing is going to be more expensive, more experimental. But then with your brand being stronger, your performance campaigns, your communication is going to be much more rewarding for admissions.
So just to sum that point up, I'm sure you'd agree with me that it has to be brand led, and at the same time it should be from a reassurance angle, if I'm right, and that is a great point. So anything else, Monash?
The next thing is universities will have to think about flexibility when they are talking to students, because in this time of uncertainty, I think what can really help in decision making is to avoid risks, and giving more flexibility will actually avoid risks. which could be that they could have different start dates, for example. They could have different flexibility in terms of the payment structures that you're offering currently. And it could be also that they could have transition flexibility, which means that they could start online, they could go into hybrid, they can come back to campus. Because when we talk about universities, one of the core benefits that they give is the experiential learning, how they can interact with students at the campus. And you were talking about other online players where they would be more stronger, where they would offer this as skill-based learning. But as universities, the kind of experience that they have is great.
Correct.
Which means that if they introduce flexibility and lean little more towards how these online service providers offer, it would be amazing. Yeah. So flexibility is going to be key, especially helping them avoid risk and making decisions much faster.
Yeah.
So that is definitely one very important thing. Another angle that we're looking at is another angle that we're looking at is the agent model, which means that when universities talk to students,
Yes.
they would have digital funnels set in place where they'll have leads come in, they'll be talking to
Correct.
the students using counselors. But when you think about agents, the agents are much closer to the student. They're having close conversation with the student and the parent, and they would be able to de-riskify a lot of their decisions that they take.
They have more influence in the decision making process. Exactly.
It's just that because they're giving a lot more tailored solution for the student, understanding what his needs are and giving them a recommendation of a university which is more apt to their particular strength.
This is a very valid point, Monash, because obviously, as you correctly said, digital funnels are going to slow down. So when this slows down, actually there should be something else you can lean into, and I think the agent model definitely becomes one of the best approaches. Yeah.
Which means that when you have your agents in place, have digital communication with them, reassure them with the kind of flexibility that you're offering, reassure them with the kind of student support that they're currently getting. So even putting a communication directly dedicated for agents would definitely strengthen that channel.
Yeah. And with regards to this prediction, Monash, there is also another side to this, right? What happens when universities start focusing too much on the agent channel and leave the rest out?
Yeah. So like everything, it has to be a perfect mix. You have to test and see how these are working.
Yeah.
Another important factor is about maturity in terms of the CRM. So today, all the universities, or most of them, have CRM, but they're probably not using the maximum capacity it has. They have the CRM have to be treated more like a data engine rather than a data dump, which means that when you put in CRM data, you need to segment the CRM data as much as possible to give the best kind of communication that is possible. Let me give you an example. So like you're talking about, when a lead comes in from India, it has to be treated very differently of how a lead comes from Oman. Yeah, the kind of communication that they require to come into the country, settle in, would be very different. Where somebody who's a very neighboring country, they can go over weekends and they can still have this experience with the universities here. So understanding this and tailoring your communication based on the nuances that you collect in the CRM would be very important.
Yeah, what we are seeing here is things going from personalized to hyper personalized. Yeah, so blanket messaging is not going to cut it through anymore. So that's definitely a very valid point. Sure.
And another thing that we would definitely see is all this while the universities were focusing on lead to application. So they were focusing on bringing in more leads. All the marketing effort and nurturing used to be for converting these leads into application. The next stage is usually when somebody finishes the application, they've already applied and they're waiting for enrollment. Usually very low focus is put on that stage because we think that once somebody has paid the application fees and they've paid the admission fees, they would eventually either enroll for, a big percentage would enroll for this term, or a few of them might defer for the following terms. But what we're going to see is, in this uncertain times, people who have taken admission, they might think of deferring this. They might think of, can I wait a little longer? Should I shift to a university which is online? Things like that might happen, which means that the marketing effort that you've put on the first stage, that lead to
Yes.
application, you need to have marketing efforts and nurturing for people who have applied and waiting for enrollment.
Amazing.
So that focus, that drop off rate should be monitored, and this would definitely benefit in terms of the numbers that are actually enrolling into the university.
Thank you so much, Manash. I think some great pointers from you too. So this was a very insightful discussion, and definitely I'm sure our audiences had a lot of key takeaways. And then, one of the fundamentals of the discussion is to prove that this is not only just a marketing shift that's happening, it's a shift in the way people trust higher education brands. So students are uncertain, parents are very cautious, markets are volatile, and the universities that win won't be the ones that generate the most leads here, of course, and they'll be the ones that build trust faster, communicate very clearly, and then support the students consistently throughout the journey. So those are the brands that will win. So that's it from us, and thanks guys for watching, and we really hope that we won't need to come and shoot more content. Things are going to get back to normal, and all of us will kind of thrive after this situation comes back to normalcy. So that's the hope. Stay safe, and if it requires, definitely we'll be more than happy to see you with more new content. Thanks a lot, and take care and stay in touch.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Monash.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, guys, be safe. Thank you.